Maybe take a couple deep breaths. If you need to shake yourself around a little bit, go to those places that seem a little tight. So try to relax both your mind and your body. So again, good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning. We're going to talk about the aging Dharma practitioner and what that might mean. I'm joined in this talk by Dr. Connie Sue Erlewine, and it's a real pleasure to be able to be with them. What we decided to do is we would each take a part of this based upon the discipline, our professional disciplines. Dr. Connie is a psychiatrist. Sue Erlewine is a nurse and has extensive experience in hospice. And myself, Tom Broadwater, I'm a Lama of retreat and have been so for the past 10 years. So we took a part of this. We also used a book sort of as a guide for us, and it's Trungpa Rinpoche's book, A Life of Happiness. It's a free book. It's on, you can get it on the internet. And we used it as a backdrop to our talk today. So I'm going to let each of us introduce ourselves and whatever you would like to say about yourself, and then we can begin the talk. Connie?
I'm Connie Jenkins, and I've been working as a psychiatrist for over 30 years, and I have a small private practice, and my primary work now is with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, providing mental health care for incarcerated individuals.
Nice. And I'm Sue Erlewine. As Mama Tom said, I've got extensive experience as a nurse. I worked as a hospice nurse for a long time. I also trained as a chaplain here in Columbus, and I was working as a hospice chaplain, volunteering as a chaplain in a nursing home. So I've worked with a lot of elderly, but not just elderly, people that have had some major changes in their life that changes their physicalness. So I'm going to speak mostly about that.
And again, I'm Lama Tom Broadwater. And one of the reasons I have a place up here is I'm the oldest. I am close to 76 years old, so I can speak with some authority about getting old and some degree of authority in terms of talking about practice. So it's sort of like that. So to begin, I thought it would be nice if we began with the refuge prayer. And for those that know it, and if you don't, that's fine. And if you're not Buddhist, you can say whatever kind of prayers or thoughts that you want to use in your own words. But we'll say the refuge prayer, and we'll say it in English, and we'll say it 3 times together. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So we've introduced ourselves, we've introduced the topic, and so I'll turn it over now to Dr. Connie.
I just want to thank you all for being here today on this holiday weekend. And I just think this is a really important topic, and I'm glad that we're here to talk about it. I apologize about my voice. Not the strongest today, but I hope you can hear me okay. I also want to express my gratitude to KTC and all the people who work to make this beautiful space available for all of us. And I especially want to express gratitude for all our wonderful teachers. And I've been coming here to KTC to learn about the Dharma for about 12 years now. And I took refuge about 10 years ago. And I will be eternally grateful for all of the amazing programming and opportunities to learn that we have here at KTC. And when Lama Tom asked me to join this group of presenters today, I admitted to him that I felt a little overwhelmed at the prospect of sitting here, and I was not sure I felt worthy of being in this role. Lama Tom reassured me and recommended just share your experiences. So here I am, and that's the approach that I'm going to take, and I hope I can be helpful. Based on my experiences, I'd like to share with you today some concepts and perspectives. Let's call them cognitive tools that I think would make sense to have in our mental health toolboxes as we try to cope adaptively with the challenges we are likely and even certain to face if we're fortunate enough to be able to grow older. And fortunately, we have this wonderful resource in this amazing little book that Lama Tom described. It's by Trungpa Rinpoche. It's called A Life of Happiness. And it provides a very hopeful vision, a roadmap to approach the aging process. And as Lama said, it's available as a free download. Has really, really lovely, charming illustrations and as well. And I just really, I thought it was a really valuable resource. I just encourage you to check that out. Especially if you're wondering, how do I do this? How do I put this into practice? Really paints a really clear picture of that. And today I wanted to share some ideas that I think are helpful to keep in mind as we approach the aging process. The first thing I think it's really important to keep in mind is that we continue developing emotionally and psychologically throughout our life, even as we live to our older years. And I think we all have an appreciation that humans experience a lot of development, emotional and psychological, through our younger years, childhood to adolescence to young adulthood. It's obvious that there is a lot of growth and change going on during those years, and hopefully a lot of learning. The fact is, we continue developing and growing throughout our lives. So this is something we should expect and not be surprised by when we bump into these developmental crises as an adult in our adult years, which is generally considered by psychologists to span from our 30s into our 60s. The primary developmental task is considered to be characterized by generativity, achieving generativity versus stagnation. Generativity versus that's generativity versus stagnation. And I hope we can have more of a discussion later about what this might mean for us as individuals. And our later adult years, which are considered from our 60s onward, our main developmental task is considered to be achieving integrity versus despair. I'll write that down too. Yeah, very high tech. Integrity versus despair. So in real life, I don't think these stages are neatly delineated in today's world, like from adulthood to older adulthood. So I think it's very reasonable to be anticipating that from our 30s onward, we are likely to face these developmental crises at various times. So when we find ourselves going through a difficult time or even a crisis, if we want to call it that, and oftentimes this presents as a situation when what used to work for us isn't working anymore, or when we're faced with a new problem we've never faced before, and we're challenged to develop a new coping strategy. When this happens, and it will happen, we should remind ourselves that we might be going through one of these developmental crises. And it usually does not feel good at all at the time when we're going through it. But I think it's important to remember this is normal, and how we face these challenges really matters in our adult life. And I would encourage each person to explore what generativity and integrity, those are our goals. What do those mean to us as individuals? And to know that the path of growth and moving forward is probably going to be toward greater generativity, greater integrity as we move through adulthood and into our later years. And as we go through our adult lives, keeping things the same is probably not going to be an option. What was working great at one time in life can become stagnant and maladaptive later on. I think in real life, in today's world, I see people dealing with these developmental tasks, generativity versus stagnation, integrity versus despair, throughout their adult life, even starting in their 30s. See people dealing with a lot of challenges in this regard. So it starts pretty young, and I think we can expect it to continue throughout our lifespan. And what do we mean by generativity? And I would open this up to the group. Like, what do you think of when you hear the word generativity? Any thoughts come to mind? What the mean? Okay. Yeah. Mhm. Oh. Yeah, being open to new ideas and change. Yeah. Yeah. And it's expansive. It involves a concern for the future, nurturing and guiding the next generation, concern about something bigger than the small individual separate self. And there's evidence to suggest that people who are generative in the later years of their life are happier and do better, even when they face a lot of challenges. And there's even some evidence that having a generative attitude, this openness to change, being concerned about the next generation, being concerned about something bigger than ourselves, that people who cultivate that, or people who cultivate that, it may mitigate some of the suffering that can be associated with trauma earlier in life. So stagnation. So what do you think of with the word stagnation? Anything come to mind? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Stuck, not moving, self-centered. Yes. Repeating habitual patterns. Failure to find a way to contribute. So the word integrity, like what do you think of with the word integrity? Motivation, self-respect, honesty, principled, whole and undivided. And then despair. What comes to mind? I mean, that's an easy one, but what comes to mind with the word despair? Yeah, complete loss of hope. Yeah, giving up. Yeah, stuck. Yeah. So, so if we have an awareness of these developmental stages that we know we're going to face time and time again in our lives, we have an awareness of them kind of in our toolbox. We can call those part of our cognitive tools. When we hit a rough patch, when we find ourselves in a crisis of some sort, we can stop and think about whether we might be in one of these developmental shifts and make a choice to guide ourselves toward generativity, out of stagnation, toward integrity and wholeness, and away from despair. And it's not a matter of if we go through these crises, it's really kind of a certainty that we will. It doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong if we find ourselves struggling with these things. It's part of the process. We can choose how we respond to these challenges, but we're not likely to be able to stop the process. We can try, but we'll probably end up causing ourselves more trouble by trying to avoid the process. While we're in later life, like while we're going through these developmental challenges, it's likely to be in the setting of facing some inevitable losses and challenges as we age. And I don't need to remind any of us what those are, losing loved ones, losing people that were important to us, health challenges, loss of mobility, those types of things. So while we're dealing with these, we're losing a lot of things that are very difficult to move on from often. There are a couple of factors that I think are helpful to keep in mind when reflecting on the losses associated with aging. First, I think it's so important to keep in mind that this is a collective process. It's a collective experience, really, in that if we live long enough, we're all going to experience it. We can approach the process with a sense of solidarity and unity with all beings versus isolation and aloneness. And solidarity means mutual support within a group, and that group is all of humanity. And even those who've not gone through it yet, if they live long enough, they will. So we can remind ourselves of that. And also the difficulties and losses that we face as we age are not really unique to a certain age group. So if we stop and think, we know that all over the world and in our own communities, there are young people dealing with illnesses, loss of loved ones, loss of ability or opportunity to work, possibly feeling invisible or overlooked. There are people of all ages who live in places where they face early death due to violence or illness. So I think it's meaningful and helpful to keep in mind again that the losses and challenges of aging are ultimately a collective experience that all humans share. As we age, if we have had the good fortune to avoid some of these difficult experiences earlier in our lives, we will inevitably face these losses as time passes. So I think acceptance instead of resistance would be a useful tool as we face the inevitable losses of aging. So concepts that we have, cognitive tools that we have in our toolbox. We have generativity instead of stagnation. We have integrity instead of despair. You can add to that solidarity and finding commonality in the experience instead of separation and conflict, and call it othering, thinking of things as stuff that just happens to other people. And I'm going to add one more, a cognitive tool that I got from a billboard on Route 33. There's a big billboard. It says, "Be curious, not judgmental." Curious, not judgmental. And I think that's so effective to apply that to how we treat ourselves and how we treat others throughout life. And as I mentioned earlier, Lama Tom recommended I speak from personal experiences. So this is a big one for me. I have to deal with in myself on a daily basis. And this is one I think I'm going to say, this is one to try to steer clear of. And that is what Western psychologists would call neuroticism. Neuroticism. So what that means is easily stimulated to negative emotions like anxiety, anger, sadness, jealousy. This is a tough one. I struggle with that every day, work on it every day. And it's kind of like what Buddhists might consider like mental afflictions. And I thought that Changu Rinpoche's book, A Life of Happiness, provides very good step-by-step instructions for steering away from neuroticism and cultivating more mental stability and positivity. And I think I know for me, this is going to be an important one as time passes, especially. In part 3 of A Life of Happiness, later in the book, Changu Rinpoche directly addresses the issue of suicide in the elderly. And I was very glad to see that because it's a difficult subject, but it's important to talk about and for us all to try to work on and help ourselves, help everybody with. Suicide is a complex subject, but we do have some data about it. And it's interesting, and I don't understand this data fully, but the fact is, in our country, the rates of depression are actually lower for senior adults compared to young adults. So rates of depression actually seem to be lower for older people than younger people right now, anyway. So obviously there's many elders that are doing very well emotionally. However, at the same time, the very highest suicide rates in the United States are for Americans 85 years old and older. And if you think about it, there's less people who are 85 years and older. So the fact that they have the highest suicide rates, it's very significant for that group. The suicide rate for people 85 and up there's 21 suicides per 100,000. So, and then for the people 75 to 84, it's still high, 18 suicides per 100,000 people. And those are probably major underestimates because it's probably actually underreported. So this is the highest suicide rates. So the younger people are more depressed, but the older people are more likely to actually take their lives in our country. And suicide rates in the United States have overall, for all age groups combined, increased by 30% since 2000, about 20 years, which is that's a lot of increase in a pretty short period of time. It's a growing problem for all age groups, but especially for our elders. And another really striking finding is that overdose deaths, these are probably accidental overdose deaths. These aren't even classified as suicides, but the overdose deaths for people over age 65 have increased 400% in the last 20 years. So that's a big increase. Yeah. Yeah. This. Yeah.
So repeat that.
The question was about assisted suicide versus this, and I don't have specific data about that. I don't have numbers for that, but I don't think this data doesn't relate to assisted suicide or that. These are just suicides in the community. So that's a whole very pertinent, whole another topic. But yeah, these would be these were not assisted suicides. But overdose, and usually these accidental overdoses are usually with anti-anxiety medicines and or painkillers, narcotic painkillers, where people are probably trying to alleviate pain and anxiety, and they take too much, accidentally probably. And these aren't even counted as suicides, so up 400% in the last 20 years. That's a huge number. And I think that these suicides and overdoses are outward expressions of some deep suffering and despair that is occurring around us. And we know that some of the top risk factors for suicide, experiencing a recent loss, feeling alone, and feeling like a burden. When we go back and try to forensically kind of recreate what may have led up to completed suicides, these are factors that are very notable in many, many cases. So that's recent loss, feeling alone, and feeling like a burden. And when I look at this, I think we have a lot of work. We all have a lot of work to do. We have some tools that we can use as individuals, and that's what we're talking about some today. And the best time to start practicing adaptive changes in terms of our coping strategies is today. And it's been my experience that it's harder if you wait for a crisis to get started. So time is now to start practicing, more adaptive coping mechanisms. And I think that we all need to work to create more conditions where older adults feel like they can contribute and be generative, and to not feel alone and to not feel like burdened. So I don't think it's up to the individuals to seek those experiences out, but I think it's up to the community and everybody to try to provide the opportunities for that as well. And so creating these improved conditions is going to be up to all of us. And if you or someone is dealing with suicidal thoughts, reach out and connect with other people and get professional help. And some resources locally are you can call 988. You can use that as a resource for yourself or anybody else that that might need some extra help. And also here locally, there's a number 614-294-3309, which is the Adam H. Older Adult Hotline, and that's available just to call if somebody just needs to talk, to another human being. And I actually tried both of these numbers out last night just to make sure they're all working, and they're good. They're good. They very nice especially the Adam H number. A very nice person answered the phone and was very, very friendly. And he said that they have a lot of people that call regularly just to just to talk to another person. So these resources are out there. So, like I said, I feel like we have a lot of work to do, and we need to use these tools and teachings to take care of ourselves and reach out to others. And don't forget to read a Life of Happiness to get some very helpful advice and practices that will help. And thank you.
So we have some time here before Sue speaks. And if anyone has comments, questions, or thoughts that they would like to express right now, this would be the time to do that. All you need to do is stand up and speak loudly. And if not, we'll continue.
Oh, there's that.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. 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 We have a lot of work to do to make changes, and that's up to all of us to create the changes. And the comment was about the essential difficulty with the lack of connection in the world that we live in now, and how difficult it is in our culture to feel connected. And how in other countries and other cultures that is less of a problem, and that we have a lot of work to do in our culture to improve that. Yeah, A Life of Happiness. The book A Life of Happiness. How do we get? It's just a free download, right? Yeah. How do I forget how I found it? It was on.
You can look. Well, just Google it.
Yeah.
Life of Happiness with Trungpa Rinpoche. THRAN.
Okay. Okay. So maybe we can put that
It'll probably be
in the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we might be able to put that on PowerPoint.
Yeah. I think so. We maybe we'll put that on the Zoom in the comments. Maybe we can put that address in.
Yeah.
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 Adaptive coping mechanisms. Well, I think that's what we're talking about here with I think seeking, like, I think having like a daily meditation practice, like what we talk about here, so that at least for part of the day, at the beginning, hopefully at the beginning of the day, we're able to get centered, to observe any disturbing emotions that we're experiencing at that time, and to be able to allow those to subside. I think we're going to talk a lot about some physical practices that are going to help.
I would say, thinking about the neuroticism.
Yeah.
My husband and I have stopped watching the news for the most part, because it's the regular news is just, ruminating over and over on really negative things. And there's so many positive things in the world. And then Lama Tom and I were talking about different television shows, and we really have just been watching Ted Lasso, which is a very feel good, and so we're trying to change the focus from really, there's so many murder shows on TV, and it's always the woman that gets murdered. I'm sorry. It seems like that.
Yeah.
So trying to change how we do this and taking more walks with the dog. And I'll talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
that too. But
I know I've totally stopped watching the news. I just look at the headlines once a day. I don't even click on them, just see what's going on. But totally stopped watching the news because I think the news is all about this neuroticism. It's just feeding it. So yeah, and when we get upset, there's nothing wrong with getting upset or having these emotions, but having a way to to deal with them, to allow them to subside and go for a walk. Don't dwell on those. Dwelling on those negative emotions does not help anything.
I would like to go back just for a moment to what the woman was talking about, the systemic problem of aging. I don't have an answer for that systemically, but I can say that it requires two things. On our part, the people that are aging. I'm 76, I'm there. In fact, I'm called now the old. There's the old from 60 to 75 that are old, and after you get 76, you're old. So, but I think on our part, what we have to recognize is we have wisdom, we have things that we can offer other people that will be helpful to them. That's one thing. On the other side of that is institutions and centers like this need to look at the people that are aging as a resource for them. And how can we draw folks in who have this wisdom, this knowledge? So it's really a two-parter. It's on our part to present what we have to offer, and it's on the part of institutions to elicit that. That's not an answer altogether, but it goes towards a direction.
yeah, I think you.
Yeah. I've heard it described as elders versus the elderly, to viewing older people as elders.
I think Kim, you have it.
Yes, I feel hard to say, but I know what you said about the younger folks also suffer loss.
Yeah.
It helps me know younger people take this. That was the comment I did then. Now I have different.
So why don't you repeat
Was about the idea that knowing that reminding ourselves that younger people suffer as well helps us not feel jealous. Yeah. Especially in today's world, the younger people are dealing with a lot of really difficult situations.
Regarding the intimacy and coming together with connecting, I kind of see our society spinning out of control, which gets to the whole bad news. I read instead of watch, so I can see it over. And also perhaps 2 or 3 times a month, I would read something that was going to connect with the subject of the other. For example, in the reading of the Bible, these people I would like to let find to do. If there's a boat coming up, I will call in representative of him up to you. And it kind of discharges my anger with
Yeah.
and the last thing is, I think of generation, as it is my natural nature. I'm not a poet. But that is that my generation, and in America, really speak, been very dirty, easy, we've been very selfish, we've created all of the junk, we're leaving very bad situation.
Yeah.
So I even think that it's nice to really glad.
Yeah. Audience member was discussing the awareness that perhaps the older generation has not left things in the best shape for the younger generation. And also discuss some meaningful ways of interacting with some of the difficult news rather than to selectively read the news and then take some sort of meaningful action when that's available, like writing a letter or contacting lawmakers, putting the energy into something that might actually be helpful rather than just watching the same negative news programming over and over.
I like what David has said, which is, yes, there are many things in this world that have gone badly. And the news tells us that. But there's always something we can do. Always. And it may not change the direction of the world, but it changes things. And so I like to keep the phrase, there's always something I can do in my mind. And that keeps me from that despair.
Mhm.
And it keeps me generating more positive kinds of things. And it doesn't have to be big to change your own life.
This period of time is intellectually the concept of being in the present, like when you doing your breath. But intellectually, the physical in my life, due to illness, due to limitations, due to all that stuff, I am totally you know, I have to be in the moment, like, it seems like time has its own rhythm, and so all of these kind of things that I quit, like kind of control and resistance and change and that with them, the time is gone from me. Elaine, you were even in the present. And it was not through any willing of it on my part. I mean, like outside, and that's how I kind of look at it, even in my period of that fatigue. Sometimes I just was so tired. It was like we draw that, you know, you were like practice, and we also knew I had this opportunity to serve my negative karma when we talk about the generation and what was left out. In this time, I have the opportunity to purify some of that karma directly. So if I can have those two views, it helps move me. It's all about the view. You know? It seems to be wonderful, I view it as human life, it doesn't matter, you know, one of the things I've gone with is not good. But that's how we balance it, like, really. In that, the unknowns have never been this big. I've never gone through this before. So why would I not do it? Why would I not experience it? But that curiosity, the new adventure, and all of that, it's a question along the way. Finding out that and share it. This is some of my thoughts. There are not any thoughts right on top of it, and I'm never there. That's my long way.
The audience participant was sharing the aging process has been a great opportunity to be in the present moment. It's become easier to be in the present moment. And it's also viewed as an opportunity to clear karma, to work on karma. So, 2 blessings.
I appreciate the markers 75 years. I just reached 75 and I have this compulsion to make connections. And one of the most significant connections I've made is to ask the other person to check in with me every week. And I don't know, I was surprised that the same came so naturally. But I'm also in the recovery community, and this is another place that access to young folks who are struggling has been really good. And it's a kind of a personal action that we can find some place to make those connections. It's eased my journey.
Nice.
It's beautiful. Yeah, the audience participant was sharing her experiences. Shared that she's 75 years old and had many blessings from being able to be connected with younger individuals, especially in the recovery community.
Mama Kathy.
I'm covering the Zoom audience. I apologize to that we only have 3 microphones. But you were saying meditation is a good suggested activity.
Yeah.
But what if the people you are with, it says here, do not believe in this?
Oh. Well. Do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, the question from the Zoom audience was if meditation is a good adaptive coping strategy, what to do if the people that you're living with or around don't believe in it, don't support it. I'll let you speak to that, Tom.
Well, I would have to delve more deeply into what the question means. Why does that make a difference to you that they don't believe in it? I'd be very honest with you. There's nobody in my family that meditates. I'm the only one that meditates.
Mm-hmm.
But they respect that. And I, in a sense, demand that I be given that space. When we bought our house, one of the stipulations I made with my wife, and I said, I don't care what whatever house you want's fine with me. But I said, there's one stipulation. I have to have one room that's for me to meditate in. So I'm not sure if the questioner is being somehow harassed by it. That's a different matter. But if it's simply they don't believe in it, that's okay. I mean, we can live with that as long as others tolerate what our beliefs and our practices are. And I think we can request that of those that we love.
I think too, if the meditation is something that they their personal religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs don't flow with. I mean, there's the centering prayer, that's a Christian prayer. There's contemplations that one can do. There's a mindfulness meditation not attached to Buddhism that is taught in, through many counseling outlets. So there are ways to get the same benefit in different avenues
Yeah,
that are available.
a walking
A
meditation.
walking meditation, or just being in nature itself.
Yeah.
I mean, meditation, the word can be used in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Just, being present in the moment and enjoying
Yeah.
the nature surroundings, or maybe it's the people you're with, and thinking about how lucky or how happy this moment is. Those are all types of ways you can get to that benefit of meditation.
Yeah, there are obviously different forms of meditation. It's not just sitting on a cushion.
Right.
And this is what we're talking about, walking meditation. Simply sitting. I mean, we began this morning by just simply relaxing. And that's important. So it comes in all different sizes, colors, and flavors. We shouldn't think of it in a very narrow way.
Good.
And I think taking responsibility for our own self-care is a really important place to start when we're trying to be more adaptive in our coping strategies.
Yeah.
I have one more question. Any suggestions to give others who are resistant to seeking professional help?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. So the question was about what to do for loved ones or friends who it sounds like their friend may think that they need professional help, but the other person's reluctant to seek it. Okay. We have a participant who says she has a direct experience as a resistant person.
And what they do with me is there's a lot of kindness and compassion, so they stay and then they come back, and they give me space and then they come back. I have to be able to examining what is my resistance, what is this for the mind of fear. The most helpful is the space, the kindness, the kind of just until I become unconscious.
That's great. Well, she shared that what underlying the resistance for her was fear. And that the most helpful approach for her friends was kindness and compassion and giving her space, but continuing to come back and check in.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Nice.
I like that a lot.
Feel that this is waiting until the person will inevitably such pain.
Yeah.
Maybe hope.
Yeah, and other audience participants shared that timing is really important, and to have patience with the other person, because eventually the time will come when they may be more open.
I really appreciate what you said about giving the other person space, at the same time being compassionate, and also the point of the timings there. And what's really hard to recognize is not everybody is just like us. That's really a hard lesson to learn. We want something for somebody, and we really want it very much. We want another person to be happy. And we see so clearly in our mind how that person could be happy. They may not see it that way. And I love the idea of simply giving them space and being compassionate, because I think that might be the best that person needs. Just space and kindness.
The other thing that
I like,
you, well, I do that, and you was helpful, and I forced that.
Mhm.
So. Just ask, will you at least ask me what it is that I was wondering? That challenges me to be direct with you. And it's okay if you do that, but it's been so helpful for me to see how unskillful I was in my way of helping you for why. They kind of back away, I'm, well, how are you thinking what
Mhm. So important.
yes. So the first step in giving help is to ask, how can I help? Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really simple step, isn't it?
Mm. Modeling.
The audience participants shared the power of modeling. Model the maybe the changes that you're hoping to see in another person. Not trying to tell them what to do, but model that.
We are at the hour. Do we need a break, or would you like to continue? Break? Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll resume in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, all right, we're on. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the physical changes of aging and how we can work with that. So in his book, Trungpa Rinpoche, it doesn't really talk so much about the physical aspects, but just echoing what Dr. Connie said, you know, that the time is now. And I'm going to start with a couple of quotes. I read this quote the other day, and it said, "I'm too young to be so old," and I can go with that. But also, I remember talking with Mama Kathy, and I was sort of whining, and I said, "How do I get to be so old?" And she said, "We're lucky." And I've kept that with me. And so, so yeah, and then we also have Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. When I was going to train as a chaplain, I asked him, "Well, what should I keep in mind as I train as a chaplain?" And I thought he was going to say, "Oh, loving kindness or compassion, you know, the nice things." And he said, "Impermanence." And I have had to think about that a lot. But it's absolutely what to keep in mind. And that's what we're all here talking about, is the changes of aging. This is impermanence. And as the one audience member said, you know, being older, it really does tend to put us in the present moment more, rather than as we're younger, chasing after career and children and, you know, not being so present with ourselves. So it's a good opportunity. Time is now. So I'd like to read a poem that really spoke to me as I was starting this to talk about this and starting to put this talk together. And this is a Zen teacher, I believe, Nanao Sakaki, and it's called "Break the Mirror." After taking a cold shower, what a mistake! I look at the mirror. There, a funny guy, gray hair, white beard, wrinkled skin. What a pity. Poor dirty old man. He's not me. Absolutely not. So land and life, fishing in the ocean, sleeping in the desert with stars, building a shelter in the mountains, farming the ancient ways, singing with coyotes, singing against the nuclear war. I'll never be tired of life. I'm 17 years old, very charming young man. So I sit quietly in the lotus position, meditating for nothing, and suddenly a voice comes to me. To stay young, to save the world, break the mirror. And that really spoke to me because, yeah, looking in the mirror. I read this article that said we all have sort of a fixed age that we think we are in our minds, right? And for me, it's like maybe somewhere in my mid-30s. But when I look in the mirror, ooh, the truth, I look like my mom. And that's really interesting. So I'm not sure we need to necessarily break the mirror so much as we need to change the focus and maybe change the mirror. And one of the things I've found myself doing is looking at older people and really, you know, not freaking them out by staring at them, but looking at older people and looking at the changes and getting familiar with how I'm looking through the mirror of other people. You know, seeing, you know, really looking at older people, maybe in the grocery store. But the best mirrors for me are my parents. So my parents are 93 and 95. They just moved here from Florida because of the hurricane. Now they've been living pretty independently down in Florida. I didn't see them that much. I saw them a couple times a year and they always seemed like they were doing okay, but having them move here, I can see that they're really having some struggles, you know, 93 and 95, having some struggles. But I'm using them as a mirror. So my mom has macular degeneration, so she can't see well. She's pretty deaf, and the deafness is not so much because of eardrum issues. It's because the cochlear bones in the head that resonate with hearing are deteriorating with age. So hearing aids will help to a certain point. She has chronic pain from chronic pancreatitis, but she is the most social, optimistic person. Where they're now in assisted living, she knows everyone's name. She stops and asks people as she passes in the hall, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" You know, she's always, and that's sort of the way she's always been, is really optimistic. And the other thing she really enjoys is being waited on. Someone is cooking all the time for her now. Someone comes in and does her laundry. She's so happy. And I get that. So then I look at my dad. So my dad is he's 95. He's doing pretty well physically. He has some periods of confusion, but he's a lot less social. He doesn't really have any hobbies. He had growing up, and he always had a lot of anger issues, and we grew up with a real angry person, and that still is him. He's still pretty angry at changes. He's still determined to be as independent as possible, which is good, but when he can't be, it's frustrating and angers him a lot. What I found out down in Florida, and this goes to the medication issue, he was giving my mom her medication, but he was giving her 7 or 8 Tylenol a night. And as a nurse, I know Tylenol really damages your liver. So I'm really glad they're here and someone now is giving my mom her medication, because that could be one of the incidences. But she's doing well. She's out and about. My dad sits and stares into space sometimes for a long time, and he's really not engaged. And I think that really speaks to one of the things that we can do as we get older, and as I look at older people, is to start to make choices. I was reminded of the hymn, I think, and I don't remember the whole thing, but it's "Let there be peace on earth, but let it begin with me." And I think that's really important, that we do still have choices we can make when we're older. So again, just noticing older people, noticing the gait. Are they using assistance? Are they making eye contact? Are they alone? Do they have family or friends? And then all of a sudden, looking at my own self, I go to the store and people call me honey and dear. And I try to say, okay, they care about me. And, I try to flip that, right, and not take offense. And also putting myself in that place and trying not to say those things myself. And then thinking about how, addressing people as I would want to be addressed, to notice and help people that aren't maybe not as able as I am. And to take advantage too of the opportunities that are there for older people. And I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about dementia or forgetfulness. And I think I have that graphic up there. So dementia or forgetfulness. So normal aging, it's okay to make a bad decision once in a while, miss a monthly payment, forgetting which day it is, remembering later. That's happening to me quite a lot. Forgetting what word to use. I do that so often. And then losing things. I can lose my phone. I lived in a one-room apartment for a little while. I lost my phone all the time. How can I do that, right? That's a normal process of aging. Even my dad, he forgets numbers, he forgets dates, but he's still pretty cognizant. So, but dementia is making poor judgments and decisions a lot of the time. Problems taking care of your monthly bills, losing track of the date and the year, not being able to carry on conversations, and misplacing things so often and being completely unable to find them. So there's some differences. And so really only 4% of people get dementia, truly get dementia. We do get forgetful. I like to think of it as I've got so much knowledge in my brain, things naturally fall out, that helps a lot. So it's a mindset, and that's one of the things that Trungpa Rinpoche talks a lot about. So trying to keep a cheerful state of mind, trying not to overthink when we're unhappy. The other thing, the other quote I really love is, you're not too old and it's not too late. And I really take that to heart, right? So the best way to keep our brains young, there's all these things out there that talk about doing crossword puzzles, or I do the Wordle every morning, I'll just say that. But really the best thing is to learn something, and learning another language And this is one of the benefits of growing older is that I can take classes at Ohio University. I'm sure that's true here at OSU, often for free. So learning something, keeping in that learning education loop is really beneficial and really can help with the forgetfulness, with the changes of aging that our brain has. So it's a process of self-care. So other physical changes too, there's muscle tone and strength. We do start to lose that. Okay. So one of the things that I do is I can sit here on this cushion. Someday I might not be able to sit on this cushion. And I know that you can be enlightened in a chair. It may take several lives of chairs, but we weren't raised to sit on cushions. So it's harder. It's harder for me. Actually my leg fell asleep. I stood up and I fell and broke my foot, right? That probably wouldn't have happened when I was 20. Well, it happens now. So I take a minute and I wait before I stand up and make sure I can feel my feet beneath me. So bone density, is a big issue. There are medications you can take, but the best thing is to do weight-bearing exercises. And that's another thing that so I resisted for a long time silver sneakers because I have this mindset that that's for old people. As a matter of fact, when Lama Tom asked me to do this talk, I said, you must think I'm old. And then it occurred to me, I am old. So I think our culture, we have a resistance to being old. I mean, I have never watched the Kardashians, right? And I'm never going to, but that type of thing is plastered all over. And it's another reason not to watch the television or to choose the shows you want to watch or to look at the magazines you want to look at and not just take that popular route because it ignores the elderly, right? And that's another thing about the mirror is looking at older people and finding that incredible beauty. I think about Rinpoche, Khenpo Rinpoche, he was the most amazing person and he was still teaching right up until the end of his life in his 90s. But I noticed he didn't do prostrations anymore and he sat in a chair. Did that diminish him at all? No, he had such wisdom. And so I use him as you were saying, a model to look at, well, how can I do this? If I can't sit on a cushion anymore, then not to resist it so much and not to force myself into something painful, right? Because I feel like I have to do it this way, or that's the way someone else does it. And the other thing I learned too is working as a chaplain, I was called to the ER a lot. And a lot of times, especially around Christmas, it was older people breaking bones. And the ER doc said to me, well, after 55, do not climb on any ladders. And that is something too. It's hard for us to give up that sort of independence or that life that we had, but there are other things we can change to. So exercise doesn't have to mean sweating. It doesn't have to be that, high interval intensity training, right? I've been taking Tai Chi and I will tell you, my legs actually ache a little bit after Tai Chi. There's a lot of standing, a lot of, squatting down a little bit, a lot of gentle, slow movements. And the reason I took Tai Chi is because I'm having balance issues, right? So Tai Chi really helps with balance and it is excellent exercise. Yoga, I think has been mentioned. There's yoga for people who are older, but it's important too, older people, not just older people, but people with some disabilities, some people who can't do the hard exercise. There are choices we can make. And yes, silver sneakers, and I know it's not part of everyone's Medicare, but silver sneakers means I can take Tai Chi for free. I can take yoga for free. There's a stretching and weightlifting class I'm taking that for free. So there are options. And as I said, I used to resist it because I had this mindset of, I'm not old, but I have to, but I am. And I'm okay with it. I'm getting okay with it. I think it's a process of getting okay with it. The other thing that has happened is sleep. I don't know. Does anybody here have any issues with sleep? Yeah, right. What is this waking up in the middle of the night? So I asked Rinpoche about this, and he said, if you wake up in the middle of the night, say a mantra, say Om Mani Padme Hum was the one he recommended. And if you're not Buddhist, be still and know was a favorite of mine. It's still a favorite of mine. Be still and know. Another suggestion is if you have a meditation practice, to get out of bed and practice. Now, I resist that one because I don't want to get out of bed because it's cold. Maybe in the summer it'll change, but doing something other than ruminating, because I find when I wake up in the middle of the night, there's something on my mind, and I'll just, go down that road until finally, and the world's going to end, and then I'm all depressed, right? So break that chain of thought, use a small wrist mala, which I sleep with, or just say a saying that you like, you're never too old and it's not too late. Something that breaks that train of thought. It's easier to go back to sleep. Okay. So, so the other thing that we've talked a little bit about is, I think of Hillary Clinton's book called It Takes a Village. And now I have not read that book. I think she wrote it talking about taking care of children, but I think it applies to the elderly as well. It takes a village. We need to take care of each other, right? So Lama Tom sent me this article about the elderly. There's more elderly homeless these days, and part of that is because our population is aging, but also there's not a lot of resources for elderly. I think it said nearly 250,000 people 55 or older are estimated to have been homeless in part of 2019. So it's about checking on our neighbors. And I think you mentioned that, check on the people. And they talk about that during times when it's really cold, check on your neighbor, or it's really hot to check on your neighbor. But how about just checking on your neighbor, right? Just checking on each other. And I think, again, it starts with us. Yes, socially, the overarching culture right now, we're still hooked on this American idea of the strong, independent cowboy kind of person. But we can start individually and just knowing our neighbors. I think that's a really important thing too. It takes a village. Now, my parents are lucky. They're in assisted living. But their cost is $7,000 to $8,000 a month for this assisted living. That's a lot, and most of us cannot afford that. Now, I think you mentioned there's an elderly group or something like that in this town, but I know where I live in Athens, there's something called the Athens Village, and it's a collective of people, but they don't necessarily live in the same area, but it's a compilation of people who have different talents that can then they support each other. So if someone needs a ramp built, they can reach out to the coordinator for this Athens Village who can find people that can build a ramp at no cost or low cost. So it's an idea of Athens Village, it's called, because it's for elderly people who may need assistance for different things. It's to try to keep them in their homes, to keep us in our homes, right? There's Meals on Wheels. There's things that I hadn't even thought about, but I'm thinking about now. So the other thing is Medicare. Now, we had insurance through my husband's place of work. And so I didn't worry too much about it until he was asked to retire recently. So then we had to think about it. And so I looked into Medicare, and it's actually pretty fabulous. I'm just saying, for once, I don't really have to worry too much about coverage. So it's something I resisted because I felt it was for older people, but I am an older people, and I have to keep reminding myself and thinking about that and meeting it head on. The other thing that isn't very widely, there aren't very many places in the country, but I lived in Ann Arbor when I was doing my chaplaincy training. I lived in a co-housing place. And co-housing is everybody has their own individual unit, but everybody has to contribute in some way, whether it's, teaching a class or picking up mail, or, there's some contribution everybody has to make. And there's all different ages, elderly and young people, because as an older person, I don't want to be shut away. Like my parents are in assisted living, they don't see the age range, and that's really sad. but in the co-housing, there's all kinds of ages and all kinds of people. And so you have your privacy, there's a group meal that's encouraged, people take turns cooking, but you don't have to do that. So there's a really nice mix of sort of commune, but privacy. And I really love that idea. And unfortunately, it's from, I think it's a Danish idea. It might be somewhere in Scandinavia. They do such a much better job than we do. So that's part of the village things that we can do, but we do have relatives and we do have friends. We have community, but we have to reach out to it. So coming here, having a Sangha, having a church, you know, our community center in Athens, there's some great programs and classes we can attend. I talked about university classes or community college classes that are often open for free. There's also transportation. I saw a billboard on the way up here that if you're a veteran, there's free services for transportation to different places. So there are things we can do, but again, it still takes the village and it still starts with us. So we have this sort of obligation to really take care of each other that I think isn't stressed so much anymore. So one of the things that I just recently did was I watched the movie called A Man Called Otto. How many of you have seen that movie? Right, and I think that you were talking about that, about, you know, sort of forcing yourself on to help people, having people force yourself. And it's kind of like the movie, but he was alone. He had some losses. I won't give away the whole movie. But his neighbors, even though he was grumpy, he had a neighbor who kept saying hi to him every morning, whether he responded or not, right? So there's that thought of being aware, just being aware of who is next to us, who is around us, and saying hi, even if nobody replies. Keeping that, like my mom's optimism going, that friendliness going. So one of the things that Trungpa Rinpoche talks in this book is to live with purpose. And we talk about that in chaplaincy. One of the things we do with someone, especially at the end of life, is what brought meaning to their lives, and to talk about that, to ask someone what makes meaning, what would help them to talk about. So looking out for one another, also volunteering. I just got on the board of Athens Children's Family Services. I had no idea. I hadn't done this before. I was just asked to join, and I just started learning about the foster families and the work that they do, and just the way that I understand there's just these parts of where I live that I don't know anything about. And that food insecurity. I have a friend who volunteers at the food donation program. And you don't have to do a lot of physical work. Sometimes it's just, you know, taking names, seeing if the shelves need stocked and having someone stock it. There are things that we can do even with limitations, but to really volunteer, and that's the bodhisattva motivation. And that helps us turn away from that mirror and looking at ourselves and thinking about all the challenges I might have, but seeing out there, you know, how can I be of benefit to others? And it also includes being a benefit to myself, because there have been a lot of research that shows the more you volunteer and the more you turn outward and help others, actually it reflects back on us. So, so it also helps us. And that's another Buddhist teaching, is having compassion for ourselves first, because we can't, if we don't know compassion for ourselves, we really can't take it out there. So that's an important piece that volunteering does for us. It has made me aware of different segments of our population I had no idea about. And it's been incredibly powerful for me to know these things. When we talked about nature as a meditation, walking in nature really feeds our soul. It feeds our care for ourselves. And it's a good thing to do with a friend if you can. Just, it doesn't have to be a long walk. You know, it could be out your back door, and if you have a tree, this, you know, that's enough. But just to get outside a little bit. And I take my parents outside a little bit. They can't walk too much, but we go outside and we sit even for 20 minutes. That just feeds them, and it feeds me, having helped them to do that again. So working with life. So having pets, there are tremendous benefits to having pets. I have a lot of them. I have 2 cats and 2 dogs. I've had more. And I know my sister-in-law, she has 1 cat. She's and she's a little older than I. She says, well, when that cat dies, we're not getting any more pets. And I know the thought is, well, you know, you might pass away before your pet does, and then what are you going to do? But I found out that there are organizations that will take your pet and care for it, and there are no-kill shelters. There are friends, there are relatives that will work hard. When my mother-in-law passed away, she had 7 cats. We found homes for every single one, plus her dog, except for the cat that was 24 and incontinent. That was a little over the line for most people. But we were able to do it through intention, through asking, through finding. And so I just, you know, and if you can't have pets, sometimes my parents are lucky, they're assisted living, they have their cat. Some places won't allow you to have a cat or a dog, but you can volunteer at the shelter to walk dogs, to pet dogs. There are cat cafes where you can go and just spend time with the cats. And there's something magical that happens to us physically and mentally when we pet an animal. Pigs, maybe not so much, but I know there's someone who brings a pig to nursing homes. I don't know, fine. But whatever works, right? The other thing, again, walking is a great exercise, but again, it doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, how much time do I spend driving around a parking lot to get the closest space, right? Well, what if we park a little bit further away and we walk a little bit more? These are easy ways to get that exercise, that weight-bearing exercise that helps our bones to be strong. The other thing too, and this has to do with balance and strength. So I get home from the grocery and I don't want to make 2 trips to the car. So I will take 5 or 6 bags on each arm and try to make it up the steps. Maybe I should just make 2 trips now, or maybe 3, right? Just admit it. Just do it. You know, because I don't want to fall, I don't want to hurt myself, right? Because I know that can lead to other consequences. So I'm taking care of myself. I'm also modeling it for my husband, who's darn determined to make that 1 trip from the car, right? So, so these are all things we can do physically to engage, to keep our minds active, to stave off or even delay some of those changes of aging. You know, and I will talk a little bit here, and I know Lama Tom will talk a little bit more about the benefits of meditation. So shamatha meditation, or just the basic mindfulness meditation, there's developing evidence that suggests that meditation exerts positive effects on the brain and aging. And there's compelling evidence that the regular practice of meditation can ease the early symptoms of dementia. It actually makes connections again in our brain, or it slows the loss of those connections. So meditation has some really tangible benefits, not just, you know, mentally and emotionally, which are important, but it actually physically changes our brain. It makes new neural pathways. So just as we maintain our physical abilities through exercise, the mind also must continually be trained by cultivating attention and kind presence to the world. The practice of meditation unites the body and mind through a discipline that fosters a feeling of plenitude and promotes health. And that's a quote from Mathieu Ricard, who is a French monk. And he's got a wonderful book called Altruism. It's about that thick, but you know, it's a good book. I've read bits of it. So I think that meditation, just the basic meditation, also we've talked about the centering prayer, which is a Christian type of contemplation meditation. These things work on a physical level with our brain, and they're important. So visualization. So in Buddhism, we do a lot of visualization practices, and this allows us step by step to activate our Buddha nature. Rather than just glimpsing it, we actually overcome our sense of just being ordinary. It takes us out of ourselves. So all the senses tend to be used in the visualization practice, and using all of our senses again helps those neural pathways in the brain, and it helps us to focus. So we use sound with words and mantra. Our breath, we visualize our breath coming and going. smell. Sometimes we use incense, or sometimes we imagine a smell, or we have a candle, because maybe we're sensitive to smells, but even just having incense in the room and not lighting it can be a nice smell, or opening the window, smelling nature. We visualize food offerings, which engages our taste sense. Prayers are actually affirmations. They're aspirations that help us mentally. Our offerings generate generosity, and visualizing is an activity that we can do, and that really engages the brain. There's the practice of Tonglen, which is sending and receiving, which again takes focus off ourselves, and that we wish that everyone can be happy. And I won't go into the meditation practice itself, but the other interesting thing I read was that mantra recitation, really there's strong evidence, scientific evidence that has found that practicing mantra recitation is effective in relieving stress and coping with hypertension. So also anxiety and the immune system. There's evidence of a positive effect of using mantras. And so the suggestion was to put a mantra on your fridge, put a mantra on the dashboard of your car. And again, it can be, it doesn't have to be a Buddhist mantra. It can be still and know that I am God. It's a beautiful one. Om Mani Padme Hum is the one that we use most frequently, or whatever helps you, whatever phrase helps you. So repeating that really helps to engage and to have some really good physical benefits as well. So I'm going to end here. So it's up to us. Aging is ultimately releasing our attachment to. It's the practice of aging, of dying, and of letting go. So you can choose, when hopes and fears are swirling in your head, to clutch at hope. Amid beauty and ugliness, to look at the beauty. Between despair and possibility, to pursue the possible, what is possible. And of love and hate, to opt for love. So Trungpa Rinpoche in his book says, even if we have only 1 month left to live, we should enthusiastically seize this opportunity to recite prayers, to recite mantras, to accumulate what we say in Buddhism, to accumulate merit or good feelings, and to do our practices, whatever they might be. And so I'll end there. We have choices and the power to make them. Thank you. Are there any questions or thoughts? Yeah. Mm.
I had 94-year-old parents.
Yeah.
And it's I read Bardo.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If you have any suggestions for, I know intuitively, like, if you anything else that you suggest, please share with us.
Right. So the question is about end of life and caring for elderly patients, and knowing that at some point they're going to pass away. And you read a book on the Bardo, which can be a little scary. It's pretty detailed, but I will just say the Bardo just means interval, and we're sort of in this interval of aging right now too, and looking at what's coming next. But then the question is, so what to do at the time of death? And, going to the light is good. But I would say, having a calm and peaceful atmosphere, even in the hospital, you can tune into a channel that's got sort of meditative music, and keeping down any kind of, in the Buddhist way, we don't want a lot of loud grieving, because that can have someone, cause them distress. But I think one of the best things we can do is to talk about their lives, talk about the good times that you had. And I know sometimes for some people, they're not many, but there's got to be a couple, or maybe some funny stories, and, just to kind of share with them some of your own thoughts. But again, it's part of that meaning making, because even, people that have been difficult people, let's say, my dad, like I said, he has a lot of anger issues, but he also did a lot of fun things. And so try to focus on that and try to, what made his life meaningful, and try to talk about those things. Because I do know some things that he, I asked him once for the first time about his time in the service, and he told me some great stories. So I can repeat those to him if he can't talk. So things like that. So it's making meaning. It's talking about life.
Just talk aloud.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, one of the teachings of hospice, and it's also true in Buddhist teachings, is that, hearing is the last thing to go. And so continue to talk, continue to just say encouraging things.
And that's all.
Yeah, and that's okay, but maybe they could step outside the room until they can collect themselves, that, because I know it happens. So the question is about administration of morphine. So yeah, I think one of the fears about morphine is that it's going to hasten death, right? And it will if it's used improperly. But if someone has had morphine, maybe they've been in pain before they've died, then, small increments are going to ease the distress of dying and ease the pain. It also physically makes breathing easier. So, someone who's trained can titrate or, give just the right amounts that will meet the pain, right? And deal with the pain. The problem comes if, so I've never had morphine. If I took morphine now, it probably would cause me harm. But if I had started low and went up, titrating or, doing it that way, it makes a huge difference. So it's a comfort measure, not to be feared.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 questions from Zoom.
Okay.
One person is asking about the decision to join a residential retirement community, making that decision, or taking that decision, selling the house, moving away, and so on. It says, I found a good place to move to, but it seems like I have to give up so much of who I am and what I do when I relocate. I would like to come to a place to truly know that this is the best choice. Or somehow discover what the best alternative. How do you have any ideas for me in processing this decision?
Wow. It's a big decision. Right. So basically this person is looking at moving into a residential community and feeling like there's a nice place, but he might have to give up a lot of himself to be there, a lot of things he does. And it's a huge decision. And what advice, I think, about making that decision? Is that basically it? Okay, good. Well, it's really individual. Now, my parents moved here to assisted living. They were living independently because of the hurricane. So grateful for that hurricane because they were not coping well. But it is a huge decision. I would suggest looking at different places and also seeing how much of yourself you can keep. Some places do allow pets, and that's an important issue. The place my parents are in, the rooms aren't huge, but they have a huge, a big common area. And my dad made models that when he was younger, and they were able to have a display case with those models in it. So pieces of him are still there. So it's important to really do research. And I don't know, even buying a house is it the right decision? It's hard to know until you get there. But as far as other options, like I said, in Athens, there's the Athens Village for elderly people to try to keep people in their homes. There's Meals on Wheels. Sometimes there's insurance coverage for a nurse to visit. There's the Agency on Aging often has programs that would have someone come and help with housework. So there are ways around that. But the biggest thing is going to be safety and maybe listening to other people who are maybe saying you're not really safe. So that's a tough one because again, independence is so important for us. But looking at your situation realistically is very important, and listening to your physician as well. I hope that helps. Yeah, I don't remember the title either, but yes, there are agencies that will help you make those decisions. And I know when I was applying for Medicare, there was a person at our community center, the Area on Aging has their office there that helped for free to get us onto the right Medicare program. So that might be the Area on Aging, which there must be a title for it here somewhere, but yes, the Department of Aging, they often have very free services that help, and that might be part of it. Yeah. Okay. So Franklin County Area on Aging, Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging. Okay, good. So there are resources. So if you don't have a computer, you probably know someone who does that can do some Google search for these things. But there are things out there that I have not been aware of, but now I'm becoming more aware of. So thank you. Absolutely. That is so important. So the comment was, so when you're looking at a facility to go to or a residential place, you know, what is the staffing? What do they provide? I know that assisted livings aren't regulated. They can volunteer to be inspected, but they aren't necessarily regulated. So there's a wide variety of services. Some places don't have an RN on staff. I don't think there's a minimum staffing requirement. So it depends on what the need of the person is and to match that with the facility to really do the research and look at ratings too, you know, so yeah. There's the ombudsman, and I can't remember the title, but there's someone who advocates for the elderly. They have volunteers that go into nursing homes that ask the residents how they're doing, and assisted living also. So there's always someone you can ask. Yeah, the food too. My parents love the food where they are, thank heaven, but that's a huge issue. Exactly right. What is the menu like? Like again, my mom doesn't have a lot of teeth. She won't go to the dentist, fine, that's her choice. But they serve her softer food because they're aware. So they're very good at that. But again, it's something to research. Yeah, thank you for that.
I really like what you said about what can you take with you where you go. My wife spent almost 6 months in recovery in a nursing home. And by the time she left, we had most of the house in that room. We put up paintings that she was from. We brought in pictures. We made sure we could do takeout. And so those kind of things are really important. And your statement, what can you take with you, is really important. And I also think it's important, and you're making this point, to go visit and stay a day in the place that you might be going to. What's that going to be like? What's a day like at this place? And get a feel for that. And the other thought that I had is every choice we make in life, there's going to be costs and benefits. And that's just basically sitting down and figuring out what is the cost of my going here in terms of what I have to give up. And on the other hand, what is the benefit that I can derive from being here? So yeah, it really comes down to a decision that's individual and based upon your analysis of the situation. So, and there are people, like you say, out there, particularly Area Agency on Aging, a great resource for people, underused, I might say. And I think that's where the omnibusman is located.
Right, yeah, yeah. So, was there another question from Kathy? Or?
Yes, there was one other question. Someone was asking about the earlier topic about meditating and doing Dharma practice and having others not understand that. And the person said, well, what if it's your spouse?
Yeah, well, I think Lama Tom spoke to that a little bit, but yeah, my husband is really supportive, but he doesn't meditate or do Dharma practice much at this point. I think for me, it was sort of persevering, but also trying to include him in as much as I could and tell him as much as I could about what I was doing, so it didn't seem foreign or scary. When I talk about Buddhism with other groups, the iconography is very different than our iconography that can be scary with, different forms and different colored, different arms that all these deities are, even the word deity is tough, enlightened beings have. So just to explain that, the forms are a teaching in and of themselves when the Tibetans didn't have a language or didn't have a written language. So the form, the colors, the arms, the gestures, the fierce teeth all have a meaning within them. So it's like looking at a teaching. And I have books I can share and I can read, so I don't necessarily know all the meanings, but I think that helps to take away the fear, and the uncertainty about what is it I'm doing. And so to not keep it secret and to always offer, if you'd like to come with me, I'd like to have you come. And if not, that's fine. So that's kind of how I handle that. So did that answer the question pretty well? Good. Yeah. I guess I forgot to say the question was about what if your spouse doesn't do Dharma practice, doesn't meditate, and is kind of hesitant about that. So again, just including, explaining, and helping them to lose that fear is important.
I'd ask the questioner, for whom is this a problem? Is it your problem, or do you see it as their problem? My wife is not a practitioner, and it's not a problem for me. She's probably at heart a kinder, more gentler, more compassionate person than myself.
Yeah.
So it's not an issue with either of us. And she has no interest in Buddhist practice. And that, I would wish for her that, that she would have the benefits of practice, but that's her choice, and we live amicably.
Yeah.
And I won't say in despite of it, but it's just the way it is, and I don't think my practice is a problem for her. And certainly her not practicing in a formal way is not a problem for me.
Yeah, I think my kids will tell you I'm a nicer person. I have more patience. I have more patience. I wish I'd known this when I was younger, but it helps now. So I don't know. Yeah, I can't.
Years ago, working on like why can't you do that means or and someone and she realized with her parents the question was why can't they accept me for who I am? why can't I?
Right, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah,
I'm gonna really like to light off my mom. Oh, like, why not?
right,
Like,
right, right.
that was a light bulb and period on. And something that simple, and that one. And she said, you know, it's amazing. When I practice that, they are so much kinder.
Yeah,
And, you know,
yeah. So I think the comment was, so why can't they accept me for who I am? And then flipping that switch, well, why can't I accept them for who they are? And how that makes it easier. Because again, it really is up to us, and we can only work with our own selves and our own abilities.
all I have
Yeah.
to do is do that.
I know, right,
Somehow magically, they
right, exactly. Exactly. And so I know a lot of the physical things we talked about, you know, going to classes or whatever, it takes physical ability, and sometime I'm gonna lose that physical ability like my parents have. But again, it's really, how do we work with our mind? It's my mom, you know, and her walker going down the hall and just saying, how are you? Hi, knowing someone's name, even though she can't hear them. And I don't know if she really sees who she's talking to, but it doesn't matter, because that's how she's lived her life. And I see that as that model that I can follow. And I can really have a lot of compassion and love for my dad now that used to be kind of hard, because I can see where he is now and I can help him. And that makes me feel a lot better. So. Any other thoughts or comments?
I heard a writer on this topic. I can't remember if it's NPR or Fox News, but he was saying we can practice dying as we lose mobility, or we lose body parts, as we lose friends, we pay attention to it.
Mm.
Work on acceptance, and you can start with little things and as you mature, bigger things are bigger loss.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the comment was watching a news program. Doubt it was Fox News, talking about, you know, looking at dying as a practice and starting maybe with small losses and getting used to them. And, you know, and I think here the quote is, you know, the meditation is the practice of aging. It's the practice of dying. It's the practice of letting go, and looking around us, and not turning away from looking at old age, sickness, and death. Right.
We are at the hour. Would you like to take another break? Yes, I see lots of heads. Us older people with tiny bladders. So let's take 5 minutes and come back and we'll finish up.
I do watch I'll have that. I know. I'm gonna see her again. So I'm gonna ask.
So if we could have a seat. We're coming into the final stretch.
They're in Brookdale and
So I want to thank Dr. Connie and Sue for the really lively conversation that we've had. And the interesting thing is they have been so thorough and so well prepared. What I'm going to do is basically summarize what they said. I take a slightly different tact, which is to focus exclusively on the spiritual as opposed to the therapeutic. Both are important. And I love the fact that we are having this conversation where the therapeutic is interspersed with the spiritual. It really is, it's really helpful. It's helpful to me. So we used as our template the book, A Life of Happiness by Trungpa Rinpoche. And most of what I'm going to say today is excerpted from the book. I'm a plagiarist and I admit it completely. There's also another book that I have found very helpful, just recently published by Pema Chodron, called How We Live is How We Die. It's a good book. So if you've read it, you will hear familiar passages from what I say. So the whole book of Trungpa Rinpoche's A Life of Happiness, the whole first half is dedicated to urging us who are aging to have courage. And he frames aging in terms of good fortune, which is what Sue had talked about. Aging does not need to be a dark and gloomy affair. If we are able to grow old and practice, we are fortunate. And it's fortunate beyond all expression of gratitude. He tells us that aging comes with blessings. We can continue to have the blessings that our practice, as Trungpa Rinpoche, as Sue has said, as Dr. Connie has pointed out, it all depends upon our attitude and the manner in which we frame things. Social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists are great at reframing. That's what we do for a business. Looking at a situation and how can I see it differently so it doesn't hurt my mind, so I'm less disturbed and disturbing to others. Trungpa Rinpoche reminds us that not everybody is able to live as long as we have. And not all people are as fortunate as us to be able to practice Dharma. If we were to sort of summarize what he says in a few words, it would be to keep a cheerful, calm mind. And as Sue has pointed out, he says, don't overthink when things get difficult. That's a biggie. We tend to get bogged down in rumination about the difficulties we're going through. I told you about my wife who has gone through all kinds of difficulties and to this day goes through difficulties, physical and so forth. But she's always able to reframe things. One of, I don't know that it's her mantra or what she would say, but it's like, rather than being fearful or being angry, she's curious. So she wakes up in the morning and she has this ache or this pain. And she says, well, where'd that come from? Rather than cursing. And again, restating what's already been stated is, he is encouraging his advice is that we're never too old. I remember one time I was in a seminar with Khenpo Rinpoche, and this question just arose in my mind. I was thinking about going into retreat. It was a 3-year-old ordeal, and I was almost 60, and I was thinking, I don't know about that. So I stood up, and I didn't ask that specific question, but I just said to Rinpoche, is it too late? And he said, no, it's never too late. And so Trungpa Rinpoche is saying to us, it's never too late to learn. There's no age limit to Dharma practice. So what is that practice? Let's put it simply the way Trungpa Rinpoche put it. He said, avoid non-virtue. Do as much good as you can. Train your mind. That's the Buddha's teaching. Here's a man who is one of the most learned in Dharma on the planet. And when he's asked to give advice on what should your practice be, he returns to the simple teachings of the Buddha. Avoid non-virtue. Do as much good as you can. And to do either of those, you train your mind. That's the advice of one of the most sainted people on this planet. So our daily practice at whatever age we are, and at whatever level of practice we are, is quite clear and quite simple. Our constant practice is to check our minds to see whether there is anger, jealousy, pride, any of the other suspects, hurtful states that exist in our mind. That's our practice. And to do this, as Sue has pointed out, we have meditation to help us. Because through meditation, we learn to become more aware of our mind states. So meditation can be simply during the day at any given moment, sort of taking stock. Where's my mind? Where is it right now? Is it in anger? Is it in jealousy? Where is my mind? That's a practice, easily done at any time. And through meditation, we learn what to abandon in terms of unhealthy mind states and what to adopt. That's called mindfulness. We learn to be careful when we realize how much damage is done when afflictive states arise in our mind. The wonderful development in our time is that we have teachings available. Here at Columbus KTC, we have teachers. We have wonderful teachers, particularly Lama Kathy. They are available to us. Additionally, we have connections that we can make just through the internet. I mean, there are wonderful teachings from all the great masters that are there available to us. This was not available to people 50 or 60 years ago. This is something that's a treasure for us. So all these advantages we have as aging practitioners. So what are the pitfalls or what are the dangers in growing old? I'm talking from experience here now. And I'm just going to tell you what I think. I'm just going to tell you what I think. And I think it is that we become overly anxious in guarding our private and sometimes diminishing comforts. We become preoccupied with feathering our nests. We can be obsessively concerned about our health and our welfare and our bucket lists. Certainly, these concerns shouldn't be eliminated. We got to be concerned about our health and our environment. But if we're not careful, we become obsessed by that. It becomes a preoccupation. It cuts out the rest of life. So I'll call that retrenchment. When we retrench in our body and physical concerns to the exclusion of deeper practice, it's like we've created a prison cell. The cell can have a beautiful oriental rug and lovely drapes and air conditioning and heats and all that sort of thing. It could be a beautiful place, but it's still a cell. And that cell's called samsara, where suffering of some kind or another always exists. Instead of being concerned about the shades of color of the paint on our prison walls, we're better served by planning our eventual escape from this prison, our liberation from suffering. Our obsessions with ourself and physical environment keep us from mustering up the courage to actually plan for that eventual liberation. So, what is the fear that keeps us in this obsessive state? I think at the heart of our fears is, as we said, impermanence, of change, and ultimately a fear of our own death. So the challenge of growing old is a challenge to embrace change and impermanence. This is the challenge of every Dharma practitioner. But for us that are aging, it is poignant and direct and with us all the time. Trungpa Rinpoche tells us that despite our fear, embracing permanence is actually the gateway to our spiritual practice. Now, there are people that never relate to impermanence. Anytime the thought comes up in their mind, they banish it. It's like they think they're going to live forever. And let's not kid ourselves. We sometimes get into that mode ourselves. Then there are those people who say that only this life matters, since death is nothingness. And again, in this case, we can obsess on health and safety, thinking that we can stave off death indefinitely, or that this is the only life that matters. But Buddhist practice calls us to a much larger view and vision. Our teachers and the teachings call us to fully open ourselves up to the inevitability of our aging and death. And at the same time, to be open to any fear that view may cause. And it does cause, let's be honest, it does cause us some fear, and it is scary sometimes. And so the instructions is embrace even that fear. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Aging is contending with fear. And as I told you, what my wife does, she feels that being curious is a much better way to deal with aging and sickness than fear. Curiosity. What's going on here? And both Dr. Connie and Sue has talked about, this is what's going on. We should be curious about that. The vision is that this knowledge of our aging and death, as a result of it, we can actually engage in life, appreciating what we have without being caught up in all of its dramas. And we know folks who, as they age, create more dramas. Yeah, let's be honest, sometimes we do it ourselves. We have to contend with the fact that one day you and I are going to leave this world. And the drama and the story we create for ourselves, the story that Tom Broadwater tells Tom Broadwater about, this story he tells about himself, is one day going to end. Decisively and forever. That story ends, and we have to contend with that knowledge. We need to work on our worldly affairs, but working on them is totally, completely meaningless if we are overly attached to them. Worry we do, sure. We have to let go. And that's something else Sue talked about, letting go. And Trungpa Rinpoche would add, not only let go, but let go intentionally, clearly, cheerfully. Buddhists tell us that in the beginning, permanence helps us enter the gates of Dharma. In the middle, impermanence is the whip that makes us practice with diligence. Sounds a little strong, doesn't it? Sounds sort of violent. But the point is, that a whip conjures up a rather strong image, but the point is that thoughts of death and impermanence are not necessarily enjoyable. Let's be honest about that. It's not always pleasant. It's not always enjoyable. But in the end, these same Buddhist texts tell us that impermanence leads us to the very nature of reality, to the very nature of who we are. We can learn about impermanence by reading books, right? But Milarepa said, I don't read books. I learn more radically and more basically by looking at reality, to look at life. So it's not about books, it's about experience. It's about working with our experience, learning from our experience. And most basically, looking at and being aware of permanence, impermanence in our lives. Observing. We observe changes in the hours of the day and the seasons, in the death of our loved ones and friends. Just a few weeks ago, I think I mentioned I had the privilege of being with my sister-in-law for a week as she died. I had the privilege in the last 2 weeks of being with two of my people I visit with in hospice and being with them as they passed away. And they were, for me, a sacred experience, an experience where I learned something, experienced something, realized something. Impermanence came home to me. We really can't go into the Bardo teachings here this morning. It would be, and I wouldn't be qualified to teach them anyway, but we can talk a little bit about it, and particularly in reference to impermanence. Bardo, in the broadest sense, means transition. And there are all kinds of transitions in our lives. For instance, we can understand that this life is a bardo. This life is a bardo, a state of continual change. This little meeting here that we're having today is like a bardo. We came, it was real for a moment, we were present, and then boom, at 12:30 it's gone. That's a bardo. So if we can begin to recognize this continual change that is occurring throughout our lives, we will be better able to face all our future bardos, future transitions, and the biggest one being obviously our death. So if we can learn to navigate the continual flow of transitions in our personal life, we'll be prepared for aging and death. And whatever may follow, no matter what we think may follow, whatever religion we may follow. The truly wonderful thing about this is, as a result of our being aware of bardos, transitions, we actually can feel more alive, because every moment is a new moment. The last one died. The last moment died. This is a new moment. So we can feel more alive, more open, more courageous. Why? Because every moment's fresh. let's look at it this way. Death is not something that happens at the end of life. Death is happening every moment. The end of one experience is the beginning of the next experience, which ends and leads to the next experience. In reality, whereas we think things are sort of solid, substantial, real, and so forth, life is actually always flowing. It's always moving. But what do? Resist. We talked about that. Neurotically resist. We try to hold on to something, to anything. So the instructions for every practitioner, particularly the aging practitioner, but for all practitioners, is to relax. To relax into the change and to let go. That's a tall order, right? That's a tall order. What we practice. Relax. I have to tell you, this process of relaxing may take longer than you think. I'm 75, almost 76. I'm still learning to relax. One of the things that you can do to help motivate you is to think of the benefits that you would accrue if you were a little bit more relaxed. You would be able to hear more. You'd be able to see more. You would be more alive. The continual change that every being experiences in life is what we call impermanence. Again, understanding this is actually the beginning of the spiritual path. Despite our lifetime of experience of change, we never stop insisting on stability. I mean, something abruptly happens in our environment that disturbs us. We want stability. An illness comes by, we fall, break both wrists, have a car accident, total our car. That destroys our stability. We get unnerved with what happens rather than accepting things as they are. You know, in times of trouble, I've often heard people say to me, "Oh, it'll be all right. It'll be fine." Well, in one sense, no, it doesn't. Because if you are thinking everything will be all right and it will be my way, that's not going to happen. If, on the other hand, you can say, yes, life will take care of itself, it will go on, and I can adapt, yeah, that might be okay. But just to simply say, yeah, it's going to be okay, not realizing okay might exclude what you think at the moment is okay. The Buddha spoke of three kinds of suffering. The suffering of suffering, which is the ouch and any pain. It's brute, naked pain. Then there is the suffering of change. And we've been talking about that all morning. It's like we can never get life exactly as we want it. I don't know about you, but anytime I plan for the future, it never quite turns out the way I wanted it to. It never does. There's always something. It's the futility of striving for happiness by heavily investing in things that don't last. That's the suffering of change. We may intellectually convince ourselves of the truth and the wisdom of this until the next new thing comes along that we want, you know? So it takes work. The third kind of suffering is that the Buddha spoke of is the suffering that is all pervasive. It's the gnawing discontent we feel when we resist changing nature of life. We resist the changing nature of our lives. Life as it really is. We want solid ground. This is Pema Chodron speaking here. We want solid ground. But that's just not in the cards. I've lived almost 76 years and I've yet to find solid ground. It keeps falling out from under me. So when we examine closely, there is a constant insecurity that can pervade every moment of our life. And that insecurity can emerge in full force at any time. And it can, for the person who is growing older, pervade and dominate their lives. All pervasive suffering is our struggle against the fact that everything, all the time, is changing. We know, despite our best planning, the future is never exactly as we plan it. In that respect, it's a bit messy and unscripted. And this unscripted part, we can't control. And that makes us nervous. We have to understand that impermanence, the wide open nature of our lives, is not the problem. What is the problem is our wanting permanence. In the morning, I read a prayer that goes like this: a shooting star, a candle flame, an illusion, a dewdrop, a water bubble, a dream, lightning, a cloud, all conditioned dharmas, all life is like that. So I am being prayerfully urged to become friends with my impermanence, because everything under the sun has a fleeting quality to it, like a dewdrop, like a flash of lightning. And in the same manner, I'm being urged to see the freshness of every moment, precisely because it is impermanent. So we're always in a bardo, a transition, because impermanence never, ever takes a break. Let's also face the fact that thinking about change can be a poignant experience. I can feel sad and it can feel scary. In my old age, the speed at which time has moved and is moving takes my breath away sometimes. I can remember back when I was a little boy, back in West Virginia, swimming in a summer, during the summer on our farm, swimming in a creek. That's like yesterday. but it's past like a blink of an eye. And I have that understanding based on the vantage point of my old age. It happened like that. It's gone. And now at 76, what I see ahead of me at a short distance on the horizon is my own death. Again, death is defined as the definitive meaning of the story I have told myself about me, Tom Broadwater. That's all going to end. I see it on the horizon, and there is some sadness in my heart. And if I'm honest, a little bit of fear. But it's good. It's good to allow those feelings to come in. There's nothing wrong with allowing yourself to fear that, to feel scared. It's okay. Those feelings can actually break your heart when you see aging and death all around you. My heart is broken that two of my best friends in hospice passed this past. It breaks my heart that a woman that I grew to love like my own sister passed. Emma Chodron tells us there's nothing wrong, there's nothing neurotic when we allow these feelings in. To the contrary, through these feelings, we can develop an open heart. So the painful feelings we feel about impermanence, if we stay with those feelings, we are getting close to our deeper selves. Again, as Pema says, that rather than seeing our sadness as a problem, see it as a sign that we're on to something. We are tasting our resistance to the continual flow of our lives. If we expose ourselves to the continual flow of time and experience, we gain confidence in being able to hold on to that sadness. And we can begin to trust the flow of life rather than some false idea of success that we've manufactured. It's a matter of training our mind, reframing sometimes. So may our practice be to become familiar with, to know change, to know impermanence, the dreamlike nature of it all, to learn to relax into it. Actually, this relaxation is an essential part of our practice. My hope for all of us is that we bring this relaxed familiarity with our impermanence into our lives. And most importantly, yes, to our deathbed. Ready for whatever happens next. You ask, what's going to happen? How do we prepare for death? By the way we live. How do we live? How we live is how we die. I have probably in my lifetime experienced, particularly in hospice, maybe a score of people dying, and everybody dies differently. And it's based upon how they lived. I worked in a program called No One Should Die Alone, which is basically for folks that come in more often than not homeless, and the hospital decided they shouldn't die alone, so they have volunteers go. And it's remarkable the different ways people die. Some people are yelling, screaming, tormented. And of course, your job as a witness to that is to, do what you can, rub their head, hold their hand, whatever. And then there are people like my sister-in-law who that whole week when she was not able to speak, but that whole week while people came in to greet her, she was a school teacher. And so her former students came in one by one and said goodbye to her. And she couldn't speak, but she smiled at every person that came in. You live, you die as you live. So Trungpa Rinpoche is urging us to develop a calm, clear mind that can bring to the process of our aging and finally to our deathbed, to bring that calm, clear mind. And again, as Sue has pointed out, one of the methods to begin doing that is meditation. The second of the four thoughts that lead us to the Dharma reads like this. I love this. Every Nundro student recites this every day. The world and all of its inhabitants are transient. Our lives are like water bubbles on a mountain stream. Who knows when we will die and become a corpse? Since the practice of Dharma will help, I will practice diligently. This is the view, this is the conduct our great masters wish us to take to heart. And again, a Nundro student will say that prayer, that vision every day. So at the end of Trungpa Rinpoche's book, he has a number of different practices for us as aging practitioners to do. Now here again is the most learned, most sainted person, I think, on the planet. And his practices are accessible to all of us. We've already talked about Omani Pinme Hung. It's a profound practice. Trungpa Rinpoche recommends that we have Chinrezik always above our head when we're saying the mantra. The simple practice of mantra. And again, the caution here is that if we are overly concerned about the importance of our worldly pursuits, if we're overly impressed by the supposed importance of our projects, we're never going to have time for practice. When Trungpa Rinpoche speaks of virtue, he instructs us to develop love and compassion. We talked about that also earlier. By reaching out to other people and the benefit of compassion and love for us. Not only for others, but for ourselves. Because in doing that, we're lessening our self-grasping, our neurotic holding on, if we can start looking at others. And it's also, as Dr. Connie was saying, practicing reaching out to other people is healthy. He describes other practices within the book, equalizing self with others, recognizing, as we said before, our solidarity with one another, knowing that just as I suffer, you suffer, knowing that. And then the other practice of Tonglen, a profound but simple practice of exchanging self for others, seeing ourselves as others and seeing others as ourselves. So it's not how complicated our practices are, it's how sincere, how devoted, how routine our practice becomes. That's important. You know, tomorrow, there's a practice, protector practice called Mahakala, a very beautiful practice, somewhat complicated. So it has all kinds of bells and whistles in it. And you're welcome to attend that, even if you, to witness it, even if you haven't gotten the instructions on how to do it. You're welcome to come and witness it. But I would also invite you to chin raising. I'd also invite you to Tara. I'd also invite you to Medicine Buddha. Simple practices. It's not how complicated we make our practice, but rather the devotion and the wisdom that we apply to it. So I'd like to end this doing a little Tonglen. And so the first thing I'd like you to do is to get somewhat in a meditative posture, comfortable posture. You can close your eyes if you like. In Tonglen, we simply breathe out our love and compassion and take in whatever suffering we are visualizing. And we start with ourselves. So imagine, visualize in front of yourself, you as an aging practitioner. The difficulties you may face now, the difficulties you may face in the future. We've talked about those. Being less able to see, maybe less able to walk. All those things. On the in-breath, take them in. Acknowledge them. Treat them with kindness. Bring them into your heart center. And breathe out to yourself. Kindness. Love. Acknowledging the suffering. So take in whatever present difficulties you're having with aging, and also whatever future difficulties you may have. Embrace them, take them in. Fearlessly take them in. And breathe out to yourself love, compassion, and understanding. It's okay. It's okay. Be tender to yourself. Be tender to yourself like a mother to her child. Now let that image drop and think of the people in our environment that are close to us, around us, that are having difficulties aging. Maybe some that are getting close to their own death. See their suffering in whatever form it may manifest. Take it in on the in-breath. And give out in the out-breath your love, your understanding, and your compassion. It's okay. Now let's recognize everyone suffers. Everyone is aging. Everyone is approaching their death. And let's do a little bit different here. We'll say to ourselves in an aspirational way, if I could take on their suffering, I would. And bring what you can in and breathe out your love and compassion to all who suffer old age, sickness, and death. So we have a few minutes. If anybody has any thoughts, questions, comments?
Thank you.
Mm. So if not, why don't we say the dedication prayer? And say it in light of what we have talked about this morning. We'll say it in English. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjuri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been a real pleasure to be here with you. And I want to thank both of our participants. They did a remarkable job, and I hope we do forums like this in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Guys. That was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,